Welcome to the Trucking Risk and Insurance Podcast, where we dive deep into the issues shaping the transportation industry. I'm your host, Chris Harris, the Safety Dawg. Today, we are joined by Daniel Snow, a managing partner at Traffix, one of North America's leading freight brokers. And we'll be exploring the impact of tariffs on the trucking industry and examining current freight volumes, discussing how AI is transforming logistics, and uncovering how load brokers can be a valuable partner for carriers navigating these challenges. All right, let's get going.
Welcome to the Trucking Risk and Insurance Podcast.
How to manage the safety department like an expert without the 30-year learning curve. If you want to lead the safety department like a veteran and you don't want to spend years in the hot seat learning it the hard way or decades of trial and error, text the word success to 365-364-0714. Daniel Snow, welcome to the podcast. Can you please take a minute and introduce yourself and Traffix to our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, my name is Daniel Snow. I'm one of the managing partners here at Traffix. Personally, Traffix started off as a family business, started by my mother and father in 1979. So I've really grown up here, in Traffix and in the industry. In my current role today as managing partner, we have a really irregular CEO type structure where there's 3 managing partners instead of 1 CEO. And in my day-to-day, I take care of risk, compliance, the operations of the company, as well as legal. So, I wear a few different hats, and it's enough to keep me real busy. As for Traffix, Traffix is a $1.2 billion freight broker, domiciled here out of Ontario, Canada, with a major U.S. office in Chicago and Dallas, and a team across the United States. And we're growing really quickly in Mexico as well.
Wow, and that's cool that you're growing in Mexico, and it's really nice being a Canadian as well. It's really nice to hear of another Canadian company success story, North American wide. So,
Oh, thank you. It's been a great journey, and we live on a great continent with lots of opportunity and lots of trade happening still between all 3 countries.
yeah, it's wow. You mentioned all 3 countries and lots of trade. Today, we're going to tackle tariffs is what
Okay.
I'm trying to say. And I really want your opinion on how you see things working right at the moment. What do you see in the trucking industry, specifically the effects that tariffs are having on both Canadian and American trucking companies?
Well, I think all you have to do is look at the data, and this tells a very clear story. The CAS index, and you can look at the CAS index. You can look at total outbound tender volumes in the U.S. With this thing where they go and they track the EDI tenders going into carriers. But CAS in August was down 10%. The outbound tender volume index is showing even higher, somewhere at 15-20%. That's a lot of freight not moving. Now, why I don't have all the answers to that. I think some of that's going to be tariff related for sure. You can definitely correlate a slowdown in freight moving along with the tariffs. But we're also in a really strange point in the economic cycle that we haven't had a recession for a really long time on either side of the border. Minus a little bit of a blip in COVID, which was shut the economy down. You're going to have a recession. That much is inevitable. So there's a lot of things playing into this, but the reality is that a tariff is a tax. And whether you're sitting in the U.S. as a consumer or a business where your inputs are going up in prices, you're going to be more price sensitive and buy less. And, being in Canada where we have a bunch of retaliatory tariffs, every one of those, if you take alcohol, for example, you can't buy U.S. alcohol on the Canadian shelves. Well, that's all freight that's not moving.
Right.
And when you couple that with a bunch of other input costs that have gone way up in costs, people are just going to consume less. It's that simple. And I think we're at that point in the cycle, and we're going to have to work through to see where these land and see what the new normal looks like.
Well, in my memory, is a bit longer. Before tariffs, trucking, I don't think, was having a very good, probably previous 2 years before the tariffs came in. Freight rates were challenging for most trucking companies, and then the tariffs came in, and since then, um, I've seen a number of different trucking companies close down. I got an email this weekend uh, about a company, I think it was 47 years, a fairly large American company, 600 employees, uh, closed their doors. So another one has bit the dust. How, let me ask a load broker question. How could using a load broker help a trucking company that is struggling for rate?
I think as a load broker, we need to be treated as another shipper. In that, if you have a great relationship and you provide great service, we want to, and I'm speaking for our industry as a whole, we want to partner with you, and that gives you access to a ton of freight in a ton of different lanes, in a combination where you can go to a few different points to make a round trip and try to maximize that revenue and solve for the empty mile challenge of it. So it may be a matter of filling in the cracks where you have direct shipper relationships and you're looking for a backhaul is a very traditional broker model.
Right.
And there's also an opportunity where you're partnering with large shippers to be part of a larger network where one carrier can't handle it all, and you are a truly valued partner of everyone in that supply chain. And that's steady business, and it gives a bunch of opportunity for business that may not otherwise be available to the general trucking community, especially for a mid-sized carrier.
And I see it a lot when, uh, other than private motor or private fleets, I see a lot of my customers, which are the 50 truck and less size, they've got freight moving one way largely. And they're always or regularly looking for something to put in the truck going the opposite way to the regular shipper. And that's where I see the value of load brokers. But how else can a load broker be used?
As you're looking at expanding your portfolio, right? And let's say that you've got the opposite of that, where you've got you need to get out to a certain location all the time. A load broker can help you to facilitate that. As you're growing a network, let's talk about a carrier doing a partial network. It's really hard to pack a partial network all on customer direct freight, and a load broker helps to balance some of that load, to build that, to add new revenue to a carrier's portfolio, allowing them to expand the business.
See, it's a partnership, is what I.
It truly is, and we look for customers that see it that way, and we look for carriers that see it that way.
Well,
And
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to say, if I was a carrier right now struggling, because I think many are, it would be really important to me to further develop my relationship with one or two positive load brokers.
I think it's critical, and I think it's a huge part of I've watched many carriers over my day grow from a handful of trucks to hundreds of trucks, where we still do a incredible amount of business with them, and it's a value partnership on both sides. But it comes from moving away from trying to treat the relationship as transactional on both sides.
Right.
All parties in the supply chain are looking for reliable partners, and if a carrier wants to step into that role and do a great job, make sure that their updates are on point and that they're showing up when they're supposed to on both ends. There's a huge demand in this industry for those carriers.
Well, and I think that's worth repeating. Can you say that again? What is the industry looking for?
This industry is built on partnerships. For every shipper out there, their supply chain and the goods that make that supply chain flow are critical. And what's critical is that they pick up and deliver when they're supposed to. And in a scenario where there is something that is unforeseen, such as a delay, they're notified timely and they can make other plans. And it's not complicated, but it's shocking how often people don't follow through with that and just make sure that the communication is there.
So what I mean, besides the reliability of it all, when something happens, you're saying just communicate clearly goes a long way.
It goes a huge way. It goes a huge way on all sides. And that's as an intermediary, we need that from our vendors. And as a carrier, it's a really simple thing that you can do to stand out within the community is just have great communication.
Right. And the other part of that, I know I shouldn't have to say it, but I will. I've heard too many trucking companies phone their receiver or their shipper and say, "Oh, I had a flat tire." For God's sakes, would you please tell the truth? It would. I think it goes a long way to forming that relationship when you actually say, "Hey, my driver called in sick at the last minute. I'm working on it. I'll let you know as soon as I've got a driver for you." Like, because to me, that's the reality of our world. People do call in sick. Unexpected does happen. Just tell the truth for a change.
It's a simple request, but it makes a huge difference. And that advance notice, when you can let a shipper know that something is going to be delayed 2 days in advance, as opposed to 2 hours, allows them to bring in safety stock or do something where it may keep a factory line up. Has a huge impact on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the old flat tire lie is just not very believable. But I see it all the time when I review the SMS scores and the CVR scores. I do see flat tires regularly, and the truck being put out of service. So it's not that it's always a lie, but it's an excuse that is frequently used, I believe.
Probably overused.
Yeah, well,
It has been for a long time.
It's just one of those things. Anyways, tariffs. What do you see? So in the past, recent past, really, tariffs have had a negative effect on trucking. Can this be sustained? Like, there's not a lot of freight moving right now. And I don't hear either country, the US or Canada, saying that we're in a recession right now. And yet the tariffs remain, low freight volumes remain. Can it be sustained, these low freight volumes, or are they going to have to pick up?
I think it's inevitable they do pick up. I mean, the question that I think needs to be answered is timing. And if you look at the economy overall, the service economy is 70% of GDP, right? And basic calculation for a recession, you need 2 quarters of negative growth. Well, when 70% of it's services, which is pretty insulated, you think of things like your cell phone subscription or your Microsoft subscription or your massage therapist. All these things are just part of the economy, and that's 70% of the economy. So trucking plays moving the goods around in that 30%. And now when we move to that 30%, especially right now, it's a really cloudy picture. It's cloudy because the goods that we are selling, if you look at the hottest thing right now is AI. What's a truckload of servers worth?
Yeah.
It's worth, I don't have to tell you, but it's worth tens of millions. Now all of a sudden you think about how that bakes down into what's actually happening in the real economy. There's a lot less freight moving. And there's a certain small cohort of freight that's super valuable that's papering over a ton of other shippers not moving as much. And that's the reality of today. Now, what's driving that? In terms of the other lion's share of the economy not moving, it's tariffs are a part of it. High interest rates are a part of it. If you look at here at Canada, let's just very maple-based domestic for a minute. Housing construction slowing right down. Housing to me is like the number one indicator of what's going to happen in freight. Because it starts with the lumber, and then it starts with your metal ties and all sorts of that, and then you got your rebar going into the project. You've got all of these things until you get to the paint on the finished house and it's done, and then you move in, and then there's all of a sudden your furniture, your white goods, your electronics. There's all this economic activity that happens when that one industry is firing. And you're at a point right now where it's not firing in Canada. and it's pretty slow in the US.
Yeah.
Not as bad as Canada, but pretty slow. So, if we look at what's happening in the actual freight world, you've got some of these huge drivers that are just quiet right now. And are they going to stay quiet? Probably not forever. But you need to get population growth happening again. The U.S. right now is crunching down quite heavily on immigration. And there's a lot of deportations happening. That's freeing up housing stock. Canada slowed right down on immigration, so we're not going to be not going to drive demand the same way it was when we were bringing in 1 million new people a year. But as this levels back out, we're still growing on both sides of the border. There's going to be that demand for housing, and that's going to come back. Now, whether that's going to be in 6 months or a year, I think it's too early to tell. But we need some of these big industries to really pick back up and start driving freight volumes again.
Well, and as you say, unfortunately, the domestic housing industry is suffering. If you are a house purchaser at the moment, it's, you might say, a wonderful time. But if you already own a house and you want to change, it's difficult because nobody wants to buy your possession at the moment. But hey, it's the world we live in. How you mentioned AI in passing, more or less, when you talked about servers and what is the hottest commodity right now. And you're absolutely right. I think everybody would agree with you that AI is number one. How is AI affecting trucking generally? And then specifically, a second question would be, how is AI affecting the load broker business? So how is it affecting trucking? Let's tackle that one first.
I think we're still in the early days of trucking in terms of AI being implemented. We use a ton of SaaS tools that are going to help with some of that. I think you're going to see it on the insurance side, for example, on crash predictions. There's more and more insurance companies that are mandating that their fleets have integrations with the ELDs, and all of a sudden they can start to see all these patterns that are going to reprice insurance meaningfully in our space. So that's a huge area that it's just starting, but we're in early innings of what will definitely be very interesting to watch. I think when you look at routing optimization and pieces like that, there's some really cool technologies that are on their way in for the fleet side to try to help to maximize revenue. Where they're looking at it and they're looking for routing options where you may put 2 or 3 loads together as opposed to a simple back and forth between two, an origin and destination, trying to get revenues up, and that's really interesting, and I think something that's going to continue to build out. And then on the communication front, there's some really cool pieces out there where we've test driven some of these where it's a automated, it's a voice that's tied into AI that's almost like a helper for for us on the load broker side, whether we're doing a check call that's available, and for drivers if they've got a question on something, rather than speaking to a live dispatch, they can call a number or pull over and message a number that might say, okay, here's your PO number if that's not working, or whatever it is. And these are all things that are going to alleviate some cost in the industry, free up some time, and make us more efficient. But I think like a lot of the older, more traditional industries, and trucking definitely is one of those. We're in the early days in terms of how it's going to impact us, but there's definitely some positive things coming out of it, and there's going to be some efficiencies freed up from it. But I still feel like we're pretty long away from a fully autonomous truck barreling down the highway with 80,000 pounds behind it and no driver.
Yeah, I know. I'm a Tesla driver, and I don't have full self-driving, but I'm 100% in agreement. We are a long way away from having driverless trucks. Um, Trucks, of course, all have the same fancy things that Mercedes and BMW and the other high-end cars have, collision avoidance, the the braking system, automatic braking, keep it in your lane. All those things are available in trucks as well. But AI is really interesting. As an old guy, I'm just fascinated to see how AI is having an impact, and it is. Um, you know, eventually, are we going to need dispatchers? I see load brokers for a long time because I can see shippers going, oh, if I just give all my freight to a load broker, uh, with them using AI and dispatch using AI, I can get trucking companies that are very close, like no empty miles. That would be one of the big achievements of AI, I think. What are your, do you think AI could get rid of empty miles?
Look, I think that there's definitely a freight matching game to all this, and the avoiding an empty mile is the number one thing our industry can do to save costs and to be greener.
Right.
I mean, it's always remarkable how often I see a flatbed with no load on it on the highway. And what I always think about is it's probably not that different than dry vans. You know, maybe a few percentage points either way, but it's really visible when you see a flatbed.
Yeah.
And as you make more and more freight available to, a particular truck, you're going to alleviate some of the pressure around those empty miles, which is going to strip a ton of cost out for the carrier and ultimately make everybody more profitable, which really is the name of the game.
Well, profitability, and you mentioned greenability as well. I mean, empty miles are just terrible for the environment. And a couple of years ago, I read a study that 1/3 of the trailers that you see on the highway are empty. Like
Oh,
it's
I believe it. I think it's, on the long haul side, we can't afford to do that.
right.
But when you're talking about something going local delivery, that's very common. And you talked about congestion in a city, there's going to be people building tools that are going to free up some of that, allowing you to better utilize that local capacity, which is a huge win. If you talk about 30%, what's that mean? 1 out of every 3 trucks you see in a local urban area is going to be empty. Well, you could free up a heck of a lot of traffic by just, if you find a load for half of that, that's a massive amount of impact on our roads, and that would be a huge win. And that's I think that's coming. I think people are working on that.
It would just be fantastic if we could remove, as you said, half of 1/3, which I'm not very good at math. I got no idea, but that would be a lot of 53 footers removed from the highway that are taking up space. And there's, as we all know, there's just not enough highway. So, anyway, Daniel, as we come to the conclusion of this, what do you have to say about tariffs and their general impact on trucking?
It definitely is creating a lot of stress in the industry. And this, if we look at that stress, some of that's coming from just overall reduced freight volume, which is there. But in conjunction with that, we're seeing a redrawing of supply chains.
What do you mean?
Well, if you are a massive steel importer in Michigan or Indiana, you're probably not buying as much from Canada as you were before. And now you're looking for new opportunities to source that domestically or maybe even internationally. And I think this is today the world that we're living in. And that's going to create a dislocation where that steel hauler that was going from somewhere in northern Ontario over to Michigan may not have as much volume. And this is the world that we're living in right now. But I think that if we look at trucking, and we're a very resilient industry made up of incredibly resilient people, especially the operators. I mean, the last 3 years have been a testament to that. This too shall pass. And, this is a moment in time. And once people can see past the next tweet, or, policy by tweet is a really difficult way to run a company or a country, as it turns out. I think what we're going to start to see is people starting to make longer plans, which means that the capital investment, I mean, there's a ton of money, especially in the US, foreign direct investment on the sidelines, like waiting to go in. And all those new plants that are going to be built, it's going to drive freight volumes. So it's a matter of time till this turns around. But, as someone that's a participant in this, it's not fun right now. I think we can all agree on that. And, to the people that are, that resilient enough to fight through this and continue to operate and do everything right, at the end of it, there will be the next cycle on the upside. There's no question. And, I think for Canada, we need to get through USMCA. We need to see what that agreement looks like. And I think if I was a betting person, I'd say probably won't be as good as the last one, but it probably won't be that bad either. We'll probably still be in a competitive spot.
I would think so. And how, if I was a trucking company, how can Traffix help me get through this period of time?
And connect with us. Connect with one of our carrier sales reps, and let us know where we can help you within your network. And we can use that to match you with loads that will fit to reduce those empty miles or to get you to the locations you need to be to service your other clients.
Wonderful.
And that opportunity is there. And we're partnering with some amazing companies today, and we're always looking for more great ones.
Wonderful. And Traffix contact info is in the show notes down below. So with that, Daniel Snow, thanks so much for coming on to the Trucking Risk and Insurance
Thank you very much
podcast.
for having me. And we'll talk to you another time. Thank you very much.
And I really want to thank Daniel Snow for joining us today and sharing his valuable insights on tariffs, freight volumes, and the future of our industry. To all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in to the Trucking Risk and Insurance podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. It really helps us reach more people in the trucking community. We've got more great episodes coming very soon with industry experts who will help you navigate these challenging times. Until the next episode, stay safe out there on the road. Safety Dawg, I'm out of here.